thank you all for taking time out from your busy schedules to attend this forum, and we are glad to welcome you all to the Economic Times Think Up on Remaking Sustainable Cities in the Vertical Age, in association with Remaking of Mumbai Federation, ROMF. To begin with, I would like to call upon Mr. Ramesh Menon, Deputy General Manager, Times Response, to deliver the welcome note.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to ET Think Turf on Remaking Sustainable Cities in the Vertical Age in association with the Remaking of the Mumbai Federation. Today, the Economic Times is read by nearly 1 million people. It's considered the business barometer of India, capturing the sentiment of every individual and institution that has a stake in the country's future. In keeping with our credo, the power of knowledge, we have attempted to capture the best business practices which will further fuel India's growth in the global arena. The ET Think Turf on Remaking Sustainable Cities in the Vertical Age is an attempt to debate urban and policy issues related to the development of the city infrastructure in lieu of the increased urban density. We have amongst us a distinguished panel of experts who will discuss and suggest ways of remaking cities in a sustainable way. Before we commence this session, I would like to thank all the members of our panel who have taken time from their busy schedules to be with us. Moving on, I would like to call upon the moderator of this discussion, Mr. Jai Mawani, Executive Director, KPMG. Jai has over 15 years of work experience with international consulting firms both in India and Singapore. He heads the real estate, infrastructure and government practices of KPMG in India from a tax and a regulatory perspective. I request Mr. Mawani to come onto the stage and take this session ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Menon. I would like to certainly thank the Economic Times think tank for organizing a series of these workshops and panel discussions. Clearly, they highlight and bring to the fore some of the more pressing issues facing our society and our cities. And the topic chosen for today is clearly something which we will need to address, certainly in this generation over the next 10 years, else there will be nothing left. There's a lot to be done today. The whole format of the panel will be around 45 minutes, but we will try to keep it as free-flowing as possible. Let me start by inviting our guests and co-panelists for this evening. And in no particular order, may I start with Mr. Antony Wood. Mr. Wood is the Executive Director of the Council of Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. As I call your name, sir, please come and occupy the dais alongside your name tag. I would now like to invite Mr. Lalit Gandhi, Chairman of the Remaking of Mumbai Federation. Mr. Gandhi, please. Looking forward. I would now like to invite Mr. Rajiv Mishra, Principal of Sir J.J. College of Architecture, the oldest college of architecture in Asia.
Thank you.
And one of the most renowned, I think the alumni reads like Huzu. Mr. Scott Rington, City Manager of the Lavasa Corporation Limited. Ms. Girish Gokhale, who has earlier been the Commissioner of Mumbai Municipal Corporation, a clearly hot seat. Mr. Sitaram Kunte, Secretary to the Government of Maharashtra Housing Development. Mr. Ratnakar Gaikwad, the Metropolitan Commissioner, MMRDA, the gentleman who is in the thick of things at this point of time, the series of projects that MMRDA has undertaken, and yours faithfully, of course. Thank you very much once again for making it convenient to attend this panel discussion. I'm sure you're looking forward to it as much as I am as well, in having a conversation around some of the pressing issues facing our city. You know, when you think about Mumbai, when you look around, Mumbai is a city of, by varied estimates, 10 crores, 11 crores, 12 crores, 15 crores, it's anyone's guess.
16 now.
16 now. See, I was wrong by a crore. Looking at the urbanization issue at the larger perspective, we have a country like India, which has the second largest urban population in the world, but still
16 million.
16 million.
65 million in Mumbai and 18
18
million.
million. And when you look at, India, it has the second largest urban population in the world. But again, when you put it in perspective in terms of a percentage to the overall, urbanization ratio, still we are around 30 to 35%, whereas some of the other developing countries have much higher percentages. Again, the quality of urbanization in India has been quite a challenge if one was to look at it. Almost, again, the statistics don't matter, but a significant proportion of the population in many of the cities in India are in clusters which are anything but habitable, for want of better words, slums or whatever you can call it. If one were to look ahead with the kind of migration that's taking place from the rural to the urban areas, this population is only going to increase. Clearly, as we look around, and especially for all us Mumbaikas, when we see what's happening around in Mumbai, there is a gradual decay happening, whether it's in terms of the quality of housing, the quality of urban architecture, the quality of civic sense, the quality of sanitation, education, healthcare. You pick up a criteria, and there is a whole lot of things which are inadequate and needs to be improved upon. So, one can go endlessly talking about the woes of city, and all of us know what the woes are. But, picking up on that aspect, I would like to, ask each one of you to kind of come up with, for around 2 or 3 minutes, what in your view are some of the 2 or 3 biggest challenges, in terms of priority a city like Mumbai is facing, and which need to be addressed at the earliest. And then we will, pick up on some of those points and carry on the conversation. So, can I start with you, sir, Mr. Gaikwad?
Yeah, actually, when we talk in terms of Mumbai or MMR, the biggest challenge is transportation sector.
Mm-hmm.
The comprehensive transport study which we have got it, made through the associates, talks about huge investment in transportation sector to the tune of almost $60 billion. Okay. Now that is one challenge before us. The other is housing. Okay. 54% of Mumbai's population lives in slums. I mean, that shows that there is total lack of planning, because our approach in terms of housing is basically to earmark certain spaces as EWS housing, economically bigger sector housing. But housing stock we are not been able to build up. So housing is another challenge. And there, MMRD has taken a lot of initiative in construct about 5 lakh houses, 500,000 houses during next 5 years. So that is, we call it SPP, Slum Prevention Program. So transport and housing, and then connectivity to the internet. Okay. So we have to think in terms of total plan. See, where we lack is planning as well as execution. So we need a sound plan as well as we need infrastructure plan in place, which all concerned stakeholders should get committed to implement. Once that happens, then we can start thinking in terms of sustainable cities.
Mr. Kunti, what's your take on that?
Yeah, actually we are facing a very massive challenge of urbanization. Maharashtra is one of the most highly urbanized states in the country, and in keeping with the global trend, the challenge of urbanization is quite substantial. How we are coping up with this challenge is basically we are looking at 3 modes of accommodating more people into urban areas. One is through densification of existing areas. The second is expansion of existing towns. And the third is setting up of new towns. We have policies in place on all these 3 modes of accommodating more people in the cities. Here I have found that our experience is that the policies for densification have been easy to formulate and implement, largely because there are fewer conflicts, comparatively fewer conflicts in the densification route. That is why we have at present in our DC regulations 2 major regulations. One is known by the number 33.7 and 33.9. Both these regulations provide for urban renewal, basically in the island city where old and dilapidated buildings are almost more than 16 to 17,000 buildings are old and dilapidated. And large parts of island city of Mumbai are actually facing very serious rundown of buildings. This problem is also there in suburban area, but more acute in the city area. So, of the three routes we are trying, we now have very cogent policy on densification as far as Mumbai island city is concerned. We have improved upon that policy in recent years by talking of cluster development. Now we have a minimum size of 4,000 square meter as a cluster, and we are encouraging and incentivizing cluster development. As far as other two routes of urbanization are concerned, that is expansion of existing towns. We have seen one attempt was made in Vasai Virar, where the expansion of town limits led to a lot of protests.
Yep.
So it's not that easy to bring either to rural areas into urban fold. And setting up of new towns also, we have a special township policy under which we are allowing or permitting setting up of new towns. But again there, although policy is in place, although a lot of incentives are there, but not many projects have yet taken off. We hope that in near future more projects will take off.
I think, sorry to interrupt, but I was just thought I would deflect one of the points which you made to Mr. Gokhale, given the fact that he had been in the hot seat in the Mumbai Municipal Commissioner, and a lot of the times there are policies, there are well-meaning senior government officials like you who are keen on implementing some of those aspects, but still we see that there are delays or things don't move, and even approval process sometimes get very cumbersome and delayed due to some of the frivolous aspects. Being in that, being a Mumbai Municipal Commissioner and having to deal with some of those issues which were coming up, what do you think were the biggest challenges which you faced where the policy was there, quite often the capital was there, quite often there were people who were willing to implement that, but still things didn't happen. And that's the whole dichotomy of some of the urban renewal, not just in Mumbai but across, and for that matter, even any of the reform measures which we talk about happening. What were your experiences and insights into that? We would love to hear that.
Okay, you are hit there on the head, Mr. Mawani. There's always a gap between what we preach and what we practice, and that's what I found maybe about 10, 12 years back when I was in that first state. Take the example of the proliferation of the slums. Every time the government made the announcements that yes, they started in 1976, then they said no, 1980 is the deadline now. Then they said no, 85 should be the deadline. Then they came to 1990, 95, 2000, now 2005. Where are we going to, and where is that political will? And I found that even if because for every slum dweller, there is a voter. And so long as we have got the democratic system of the governance, I think that voter cannot be hidden. That voter comes in the forefront of the minds of the politicians. And that's why even if we make all the laws and all the rules that up to this deadline, the regularization of the slums will be done, the deadline goes on getting extended. This is one. Secondly, that there used to be a real nightmare because it used to happen mostly at night. There used to be the collapse of the buildings, especially the old 100-year-old buildings, which are located in the Girgaon and all this, Parel, Lalbagh, all that area. And especially because they had outlived their life and there was nothing being done about the relocation of those buildings or reconstruction of those buildings. There were deaths and people getting houseless. This was another nightmare where I thought that the government had not addressed seriously at all, although because the big vote bank was lying in the slums, everybody was going only after the rehabilitation of the slum dwellers, but nobody had given it a thought. And that's why I'm glad that the ROMF has come up with this ambitious scheme of remaking of Mumbai, and that is for the old buildings that are lying in Mumbai. We are going to save lives, we are going to save property, and we are going to transform the city into a real international one, I think.
I think those are clearly good thoughts. Since you mentioned ROMF, I would, like to hear from Mr. Gandhi, his reactions, because, the perils of democracy, it's not just unique to Mumbai, it's across the country. For example, we have been, for all of us who do the Delhi-Mumbai very often, how often is the flight delayed by like 2 hours, 3 hours, or we are just circling because only one runway is functional or part of the runway is functional, and then, and not many people know that there is just one runway which is common between both the international and domestic airport, and the reason why we cannot operationalize the other runway is because there has been encroachment, and which the government, in all sincerity, has been trying, but has been, for whatever reason, the process is getting stalled, and there a lot of it is sub judice, so we would not like to get into that. But the point is, on the one hand, we as a citizen group would like to talk about, so you talk about some time back on Manhattan, and we would like to talk about Shanghai, or we'd like to talk about any of the successful cities like Singapore or Dubai. I won't talk about it in light of the recent developments. But, probably we were having 2 weeks ago, I would have spoken about Dubai as well. But on the other hand, we find ourselves absolutely helpless, because in most other cities, the government would build alternative accommodation for its people. Just go there and in 48 hours dynamite some of the existing buildings, and you have a good land to reconstruct or redevelop the way you want it, which is good for the larger citizens. So now, given those constraints, what have you, what is, from a ROMF, the remaking of Mumbai Federation's perspective, what do you think would be the way to approach some of these challenges?
We suggest that actually the planning is a very important thing. Sectorial planning. The whole Mumbai could be divided into 15 to 20 square kilometers, 200 to 250 sectors. Total infrastructure planning should be done, because infrastructure cannot be planned in an isolated manner. It should be in a continuity. So if that sectorial planning along with the total development plan is being done, then if we take sector by sector development in hand, then the thing would become possible. Now in planning process, what we suggest that it should be under corporate governance. There should be the association or a corporate company should be formed between the expertise on one hand, and on other hand, the respective bureaucrats or respective CEOs of various infrastructure and the development plan authorities. They simultaneously together, if they form a corporate company, CPMC we call, City Planning and Monitoring Company, then in a very fast manner, the whole city sectorial plan could be done. This can, first the planning is done, then the very important step is to take the citizens' support, because mainly the whole area in city is being divided into slums as well as dilapidated buildings. The 55 to 60% of the people who are not residing in a good habitable house, they are divided in these two parts. Slum already taken care of. In 1995, Government of Maharashtra declared the policy under SRA, whereby though it has taken in a very appropriate manner or not, it's a different part of it, because the results are not that enthusiastic. So, and other part is a dilapidated building. So, if that infrastructure is being properly planned, then how the citizens who are affected can be taken into confidence. 3 points.
But if I may be slightly more provocative on that, and this is also as a rejoinder to what you said, Mr. Kunde, is that we have policies in place. We have some of these, a lot of the planning, for example, we've been talking about Dharavi, and there have been series of plans, some of which even I have seen, and there'll be dozens of plans at different points of time which have come up. Now we are talking about Seaward, Kalba Devi development on similar lines. But we find quite often you see a lot of these plans on paper, but when it comes to implementation, somewhere there it's faltering. So, I would love to get your views, and then, given the fact that you have some of the global experiences, how do other cities regenerate, and what is the kind of protocols they follow? I'm sure this happens in other democracies and not just in China. And how are they able to do it differently? Something which we'd like to hear from you as well. Ms. Gandhi. Yeah.
See, first I will complete things that so far as the rules and regulations are concerned, Government of Maharashtra is too open in making the rules which are implementable. So see now, very recently, what they are going to say, make a GR is that if 70% of the people are agreeing for the development of that area, then letter of intent should be given to them. Very recently, they are going to publish this government resolution. Now, this will make the things feasible. 33.9 and 33.7, etc. What Mr. Kunte has explained. These are the basic changes has been done in the rules and regulations. Now, how the citizen could be brought into confidence? Major worry is this, that if the affected citizens who are staying in this building, if they are not taken into confidence, the things will not happen. 2-3 factors mainly are to be seen. That commitment of a time-bound rehabilitation, how you are committing them, that okay, if you are shifting to a transit accommodation, then you will be brought back in a time-bound manner there. Then second, taking care of their businesses, because if we take an example of seawater, whereby 50 to 55% of the people are residential and others are the commercial. For the commercial, it's a big question that what about their business during the period of transit, right? If that point is being taken care, then thirdly, that how the people who are shifting to transit, what type of best comfort you are giving during the transit accommodation. And at the top of these 3 points, right, if profits are being shared between the developer as well as the affected landlords and affected citizens, then it will be an inspiring point for them. So what I feel that ROMF could able to generate this type of confidence in the people. I'll give you the example that out of the total 232 pilot project area, we have selected 30 acres area. Now in that 30 acres, 359 buildings are there and more than 8,000 families are there. You will surprise that they have given their consent more than 75% 2.5 months period only. If the developer could able to generate a confidence among them, then and then the things will be feasible. It is only a developer's initiative, government's openness for understanding the whole thing, and third thing, the citizens' cooperation.
Mr. Ryan, you want to react to that?
Well,
Some
from
of the
a,
global practices which you would like to highlight?
I think I'd like to back out to a little bit more macro view. I don't disagree with any of the comments made by my panel colleagues, but I think that it needs to be said that Mumbai is too large. All of the literature on megacity development would indicate that the cities of this size simply are not efficient to manage, which is why I think it's particularly encouraging that the representative of the Housing Department has indicated as a matter of policy that one of the different strategies is to have smaller urban areas like Lavasa. I'd be remiss without saying that. That's how our project fits in, because it diverts people away from the megacities in the future. That's how it fits. That said, the other point that I think is really on point to your question, Mr. Moderator, is that whether the problem is planning or infrastructure or housing, at its core, I think that what unites all of them, what's behind them all, is a matter of governance. Okay? That, and even in the larger cities that have not experienced some of the problems that Mumbai has, for example, Hong Kong or New York or even Tokyo, those are communities that I think have got the governance piece a little bit further along. Specifically, they have addressed some of the more obvious issues like corruption and performance management, but also some of the not so obvious issues, but I think just as structural and just as important. Chief among them has to be the autonomy of the government. If the local government doesn't have the authority to make the key policy decisions, doesn't have the authority to collect and disseminate and make decisions about the revenue sources, then it can't, then it doesn't have the authority to issue bonds, then it doesn't have the authority, or at least not in a meaningful way, it doesn't have the authority to really give the investors the kind of surety that they need to invest in some of the public-private partnerships. Governance issues have already been touched on by a different name here on the panel tonight. I mean, issues of land tenure and encroachment and squatting are at their heart matters of governance. The inability of the central government, be it the federal government or the state government, to get the money down to the local governments, where it's always been easier around the world, easier to make political decisions, is a matter of governance. Those are the really tough decisions. Gentlemen, those are the constitutional decisions, but I think that they have to be put up front and center because, as somebody else here on the panel said, citizens need to be engaged. What we learn around the world is that they won't be engaged unless they feel like their decisions matter, and their decisions won't matter unless they feel like they're a part of an autonomous decision-making process that's based in Mumbai, based in Pune, based in Nasik, rather than in the state or national capital.
I think that's the point. Mr. Mishra, you had an organization which has traditionally been the hotbed of creativity in a variety of things, whether it's in art, architecture, and particularly in architecture and the policy governing some of the urban town planning, etc. We have all the while been discussing and historically that to take certain approaches. What in your view, and coming from within your students or coming from within the think tanks which you may be part of, are there any creative approaches we could look at to address problems which are very peculiar? Because rarely in any society we will find a problem so well understood, but still the society being unable to address those problems. Again, not only the problems understood, but the constraints in which the problems have to be addressed are also well understood. But for whatever reason, as a society, as a people, as a population, we have not been able to solve it over the last several decades, and continue to probably hesitate in take on some of these problems head on. So what do you think, or what in your view are some of the creative things one could look at?
See, as a teacher celebrating architecture and architecture school, I would like to state that architecture and art has been considered a very popular humanist course, and architecture and art is always considered as a bridge to get values in life. What is it that you think your own way? What is it that you would like to do in this city where you grew up? What is this that you have seen in this city when you were born? And what is it that now that you are studying in it that is making you so important to change? So architecture schools actually want to challenge the challenges and convert them into opportunities. Okay, so architecture school is one of those optimistic creative places where students are actually tuned to convert challenges into opportunities. I agree totally with Mr. Gaikwad's view on the MMR position. I agree with Mr. Sitaram Kunte's view on housing and its 33.9 and 33.7 policies. I think looking at all the panelists talking, Bombay has been celebrating land sharing as a tool for local economic development. And there has been issues here about local government, state government and central government policies and their policy reforms. But to make my point clear, I would just like to say three things. One is urbanization, which is always considered as the index of the economic growth, and it is economist driven. Then there is something like an urban system, which is like a system of urban areas which are connected with a very strong urban mass rapid transit, which is transport driven. A third thing is urbanism, quality of urban life, which is environmentalist driven. And therefore these transport experts, environmentalists and economists are actually trying to tell each other what is good for the city. It is here that an architect comes in and tries to understand the views of all three specialists and comes up with what we call now landscape urbanism. You see, there has to be a percentage of open spaces in the city, which is not enough. You cannot survive in a city where you end up earning a lot of money but also getting a lot of diseases. It's not a good idea to live in a city where urbanism levels are falling down. The other very important point that I would like to make is that we are always talking about the big cities. Out of all the 4 metropolitan cities, if you look at the records, you will find migration is more in one particular city than the other 3 cities. And naturally it is Mumbai. Because Mumbai offers you that dream place where number of jobs are increasing than the number of people migrating into it. So people come to Bombay not for housing, but for jobs, but for the opportunities so that they can actually come here, make their money and send back home where they came from. The other very important point is, it is not only undeveloped areas, but also coming from small and medium-sized towns. I think there has to be a central urban growth policy where we need to develop medium-sized towns and small towns whereby people do not migrate from other medium-sized towns to big cities. As a chartered accountant, if you are given an opportunity to migrate to Hyderabad, Bangalore, Pune, or Trivandrum, I'm sure you will choose the commercial capital of the country because your profession actually deals with stock exchanges, banks, which are more headquartered in the commercial capital. And I think Bombay should be looking at that. I'm sure Bombay is full of opportunities and it is going to increase day by day. But what we need to really pay attention is looking at remaking in a more sensible way, policy reform, because we understand that there is a difference between evaluation and criticism. I am not for criticism, but I am for evaluation. If we evaluate where we are going, I think we can do better things from what we have already done.
But, reacting to what is there today,
Yes.
And the constraints that are there today, were we required to start all over again? Perhaps we would have done it, or certainly we would have done it in a way whereby people incentivized to stay in smaller urban clusters, which in a planned manner grow. But given the fact that Mumbai is what it is and the way it is, what do you think? And I would come back to you because I want to go to Mr. Wood. He is a great ambassador for tall buildings, and one of the panaceas which time and again we keep hearing about, that given the density of Mumbai is to just free the FSI, build 30-story towers. There is technology now available, and it was proved successfully in places like Dubai and Singapore, where you can get a 30-story, 40-story tower up in 18 months' time, and sometimes even shorter. That is good, but along with that, and the challenges which also come in is whether we have enough water supply, enough sanitation facilities, enough transportation, in-city transportation facility to sustain those kind of clusters that will get created if we were to go on for mass dense urbanization through those tall skyscrapers. So what has, given your observations, having come to Mumbai often and seen some of the challenges in Mumbai, how do you think the tall building free FSI structure would dovetail or marry into and help in some sense address some of the challenges Mumbai faces?
Well, actually, if I can, I'd like to start off with a slightly controversial statement, okay, which is not about tall buildings. We can come back to tall buildings, but you're asking about these challenges to Mumbai, and I agree with everything that's been said. But actually, I want to suggest that if Mumbai wants to solve its problems, which are considerable, it needs to stop concentrating on solving its problems, and it needs to think much bigger than that. And in my time in the city, the problems are so appreciable that the solutions are only thinking, kind of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ahead. And I think it needs to stop thinking, how can it just solve these immediate problems, which are considerable, but what does the city want to be in 40 years from now? Where does it need to go? And the planning needs to be bigger scale. Singapore, we've heard it mentioned already tonight. Singapore, in the past 4 or 5 years, has expanded its central business district. But it's expanded its central business district on land that was reclaimed 40 years ago, ready for the expansion of the central business district. And so, I feel that if it's only concentrating on solving the immediate problems, you're missing the opportunities of putting in place bigger plans which are going to, improve the overall urban habitat. And I'll give you another example. I don't know of any successful city in this world, really successful city, which doesn't have significant non-car-based, non-automobile-based mass transit systems. I just don't know of any. So why? So I think Mumbai needs to move as quickly as possible to implementing non-automobile mass transit systems, and I know there are plans for that. But note my words were as quickly as possible. So that's my observation in terms of one of the biggest challenges to Mumbai. Yeah, I've lived in Bangkok, I've lived in Jakarta, I've lived in Kuala Lumpur, I've lived in 5 or 6 cities in Asia, and I come to Mumbai, and I mean no disrespect here at all, but this is a city which is so far beyond capacity, so far, because the fundamental decisions on infrastructure were not made 30, 40 years ago when it was a city of 8 million or 9 million. When cities like Hong Kong and Singapore made those fundamental decisions, infrastructure decisions, and now it's so difficult to do it because the pressures are so great, you know, the people that live in slums and all the rest of it. But every day that those tough decisions are not made and implemented, it gets even more difficult. So that's what I think is the biggest challenge, where Mumbai really needs to see what are the bigger things that it needs to do. Back to the tall buildings, because that's, you said I'm an advocate for tall buildings, that's my job. Mumbai's got to completely stop building tall buildings right now, because the infrastructure's not in place. The infrastructure's not, forget it for a while. The infrastructure has got to be in place. And that's what all colleagues in this panel have already said now. Not only the waste and the water and the power and the mass transit, but the social infrastructure as well. It's got to be in place. And what I'm seeing is the tall buildings that are springing up in the city are just isolationist structures. You know, they are not linked into any infrastructure, because the infrastructure is not, you know, it's not placed. And again, just to give you another example, because I think examples are good, and this is the whole focus of our conference, is to bring 72 people from around the world to give their experiences. But, you know, if you build an office tower in the City of London, I'm from the UK, if you build an office tower in the City of London, which might house 4,000 people, do you know what car parks that building would be required to have? How many car parking spaces for an office tower of 4,000 people? Probably 10 car parking spaces. They would not be allowed to build that office tower with any more than 10 car parking spaces, because the whole policy is preempted that an office tower is allowed on that site because it is close to mass transit. So it's all thought out, it's not developer driven, it's not what can I develop on that site for maximum financial return, it's what fits into the bigger policy to discourage car use moving to and forth, because the infrastructure is there to make it. So tall buildings, I genuinely believe, are definitely a part of the solution for Mumbai and other cities. But the infrastructure has got to come at least in parallel, if not first.
So the key point here is infrastructure, and I would like you to address, Mr. Kante. Given the fact that there is a significant shortage of housing units, and we keep talking about rental housing, we keep talking about PPP in, I'm for a moment stepping aside from the slum rehabilitation or society redevelopment, which is a separate process altogether, but there is much more needs to be done to address some of the housing problems. One of the solutions was to create some of these clusters with the social ecosystem in terms of the schools, in terms of hospitals and other social facilities in the outskirts of the city, where you provide this kind of urban housing and rental housing, because otherwise it's clearly not affordable to construct that in more downtown or some of the closer suburbs. But the biggest challenge one finds is transportation. Nobody will want to come and stay perhaps who has a job in suburban or mainland downtown Mumbai in a distant suburb of Bhiwandi, for example, if it's not well connected. And what is it that the government is planning to do or doing in some of those aspects to create the right kind of incentives? And that's also taking a point from where Antony left talking about how it's not just about creating the buildings, but creating the social ecosystem around that.